Hello and welcome back to Building Wealth on the Go, a podcast by KLT Wealth Management. My name is Brad Wilson, financial advisor with KLT Wealth Management, and I am once again joined by my team members, certified financial planner Joe Filiomeni and qualified associate financial planner Courtney Beach. Today is Friday, November 6th. We're recording a little bit later this week as if you weren't aware, there was a US election this week, and we wanted to postpone it as much as we could to gather as much information in on the US election so we can have lots to talk about. And I don't think there's a shortage of things to discuss. So I think the first one is we don't have a US president yet, or a new US president yet. We're kind of up in arms, but the latest information I just checked is Joe Biden is leading in all of the kind of four remaining states there, swing states. So we're trending towards a Biden victory, but at present time, there is nothing that's been declared yet. So we're in a bit of a state of I would say chaos, because we are seeing some Trump coming out and spewing lots of different lawsuits and things like that. So yeah, Joe, what's your thoughts here initially on what we've seen the last few days?
Yeah, I think this podcast is completely different than what we anticipated this podcast to be.
Yeah,
Sure.
This stage of the game. Like, this is amazing that how long of a process this has taken because of all the mail-in votes.
It's
Um,
amazing just how many people actually got out and voted this year
yeah,
too. I think
yeah,
it's the record the last 20 years. They've never seen as many votes as they have this year.
150 million people, I think it was, that voted, which is
wow,
incredible.
Yeah.
So,
wow.
yeah.
Yeah. So obviously there's concern out there, and that's why people were voting. And we kind of knew that would end up happening. Of course, we didn't know why they were coming out to vote. Are they voting for Biden or are they voting for Trump? And obviously Trump has, a following, and we're seeing that, in some of the numbers. But yeah, as the day kind of progresses here and as the week has been progressing, it seems to be, Joe Biden seems to be, heading in that direction of getting that 270 electoral votes. And it's quite an interesting system, that the way that they do that, in terms of how, an entire state, regardless of the amount of delegates that they actually win in the state, but basically the majority rules, and that state goes either red or blue. So I found this very interesting. This is probably, I'm not a political type person to begin with, because, at the end of the day, I'm more concerned about the markets and what's happening in the markets. But I found this process, more than 2016, to be very interesting in terms of how it's taken place, and quite excited to see how it's going to end.
Yeah. Because most elections, they don't necessarily affect the market as much as we sometimes think. I mean, especially in our industry, things usually take a long time to pass through Congress, to pass through the Senate, to make the changes that will actually affect the market. But I think a lot of people showed up because there's a lot of social implications that will come out from this. I mean, we've seen a lot of protests even before we started ramping up to the election, when the Me Too thing happened a few years ago and is still kind of rolling along. Now we got the Black Lives Matter thing happening. And I think a lot of people were, it felt empowered to have a say about what their representatives, feel about this.
Yeah,
I think that's great. Like, the fact that, the people are having their say. And I would love to find out, like, what the demographics of that is. Like, are we looking at that younger generation, that, that millennial group that is really going to be the next wave of social responsibility, and they're going to be more involved in politics in order to make change? Because I'd love to see that here in Canada too.
Yeah. The other thing is, I think there's more minority groups that are taking part than ever before. We've been hearing articles about a lot of polling stations being closed in minority neighborhoods, and I think that actually drove more people to go out and vote, because it was they felt their voice was being suppressed, and so they went out of their way to make the vote. So I will be interesting to see if they actually did turn out in big numbers this year.
Yeah,
Mhm.
and I think the part of the reason we are seeing the record numbers, Courtney, somewhat to your point, is, and it's kind of unfortunate, it does take some social unrest to get everybody who is eligible to vote out to vote. But I think it's phenomenal that people are voting, because I think maybe 2016, maybe even the year before Obama's reelection, I think maybe people were just like, you know what, it doesn't matter to me, it doesn't impact me, doesn't impact my family, my vote doesn't matter. But I think the message this time around was every single vote matters. And what we're seeing in the draw out of this election is, yes, every single vote matters. Look at some of
Yes.
the races. It's a couple thousand votes, right?
Mhm.
You know, and it's just small little communities that might not have voted before are making the difference this time around. So
Yeah.
it's really, I think this election more than anything is showing the importance of these tight races. You know, I think
Yeah.
Biden was up like just 1,000 votes in Pennsylvania earlier today at one point. So
Mhm.
just how close it is, right?
Yeah. And I mean, I don't want to discount how popular Donald Trump is. He's very popular in certain groups and in certain states. But this is just my personal opinion. I think part of the reason why he won, and it was such a surprise victory last time, to your point, Brad, is that people just didn't bother going out to vote. They thought, hey, Hillary's going to win. It's going to be a landslide. But the Republicans, they're diehards. They go out and they vote, the Trump fans. So yeah, I think people didn't want that to happen again, maybe.
Yeah.
That's just
But
my
the one
thoughts.
thing that I think did stay consistent from 2016 to 2020 is the fact that the polls weren't really as accurate.
Mhm.
Again, right? The polls had Hillary Clinton winning by a landslide in
Mhm.
2016. The polls had Joe Biden winning by a landslide, and he might still hit like close to 300 electoral votes. You know, if he sweeps the rest of the states, he might. But in terms of a blue wave, you look at also not just the presidential race, but the Senate race as well. People were
Mhm.
expecting it to be, blue across the board. And, there's a good chance the Republicans maintain majority in the Senate. And that kind of creates a bit of a gridlock, which I think the markets have really, you've seen like the markets have a great week. And I think part of the reason is they've seen the Senate race flip more Republican, and the gridlock is a bit more positive for investors and investor sentiment. So I think from that standpoint, it's going to be really interesting to see how that race, because that race is really tight as well. So not only do we have the presidential race, we've got the
Mhm.
Senate race as well.
Yeah, like I guess on your point to the markets, right? I think the markets like the fact that we will have gridlock.
Mm-hmm.
So they're it's going to be status quo. So
Yeah,
I think that's what the market is happy with. So it's not going to be, Biden going in and maybe attacking sort of, oil producers or, fossil fuels and moving to environmental things. He'll probably work on that as based on his platform, but he's going to have difficulty in that if the Republicans are managing the Senate.
Mhm.
So markets are saying, okay, it's going to be status quo. I think both sides are in agreement that some form of a support package is forthcoming, and I think that's what
for sure.
the markets are counting on. Maybe not as big as what the markets are counting on,
Mhm.
but that support, a general support across all economies in terms of keeping interest rates low in the foreseeable future to keep the economy keep running until we kind of get around this COVID-19 situation. So yeah, it's been great to see the markets, and I just want to kind of make a point because got an email on Monday from a client just saying, with in light of the COVID and the US election and stuff, maybe I should move my money to cash. And we get that comment every now and again, like we should move it
Mhm.
to cash and then move back in. And like we deal with mutual funds, of course, and we don't do that. It's trying to time the market. It's impossible to time the market.
Mhm.
And in 2016, had you have done that, you would have been burnt because you would have went to cash, and then you would have missed up on the increase in the markets after Trump did get elected.
Mhm.
And I think the same case is now. Had we moved to cash, or if people decided they wanted to sit out, like we've had very, very good markets throughout this week. Now, that being said, it's been only that tech sector has been the only
Primarily, yeah.
moving. 55% of the stocks on the stock exchange have been only moving up. So we don't have like a broad base thing, which kind of signals that we do have more room to grow in terms, because all these other companies are very profitable, are doing well. They're not in the limelight right now.
Yeah.
So
I think you're right. I think the market's like going into the election, they had priced in a Biden victory. I think so. The anticipation was
The
there was
blue
going to be
wave.
a blue wave, and so when the markets weren't a blue wave, but they were more favorable to the market conditions with some sort of gridlock, but still with a Biden victory, anticipating, as you said, Joe, stimulus, a good package coming into the economy to support the economy. When they see that gridlock, that's the sign that, you know, you're right. Like a lot of what's been going well for the markets over the last years may still continue. So, you know, now that that's been priced in, I think some people had anticipated, you know, maybe just a relatively flat week, if maybe a little bit of volatility. But you know, with that gridlock, I think it was very favorable for the markets. And
Yeah.
now it's going to be interesting to see, once there is a decision, how all of Donald Trump's kind of mess of lawsuits and suing everybody and everyone, how those play out, if they even gain any traction, and if that causes any, you know, investors to be a little worried, kind of want to get out of the markets, or if that causes any concern, because that might be the next thing that we watch in terms of, does that have any impact? Does that do anything? Does it get traction, or is he just going to end up, you know, kind of conceding and eventually leaving the White House?
My thoughts is it might not, I'm not sure it's going to affect the markets too much, but what might is if there's social unrest that develops because of these lawsuits. I mean, right now, his followers are getting kind of restless. Some of them are even showing up at the stations and the centers where they're counting the votes and protesting already. So is that going to develop into some more social unrest, and will that affect the markets? That's my question. I think we are going to see a stimulus, but it's going to be, like you both said, more not maybe as big. You might see stuff that's more targeted to certain industries, because that's more apt to get between past both the House and the Senate. And for those things that he can't get through both, Biden can't get through both houses, is we might see some more executive bills come straight from the White House instead of trying to pass them through the Senate. So we'll see how that develops.
Yeah, certainly an interesting time for us. And yeah, we're definitely going to sense that in the market. And I think the key thing for investors is, you know, having that conversation with your financial advisor, you know, having that discussion, seeing what your goals are and what your timeline is. And if you still have timeline into the markets, and if you've been buying all through the volatility through the year, you continue. There's really not much changes. You allow the manager of the mutual fund to kind of make the decision and move into the different positions. And geographically, we're starting to see, you know, we continue to see sort of the managers move more to stocks as opposed to bonds and the balanced funds, as well as geographically, there seems to be a move to Europe, which is interesting, moving outside of US. So potentially that might be 2020's theme, right? Where we'll start to see some investments and some return in some of those multinational companies.
Yeah. One of the points I wanted to discuss, that sort of segue from what you said, Joe, is some of the trade deals and stuff that might come out of this election as well. Like, Trump has been very anti-China, and I'm not seeing that Biden isn't going to continue with that somewhat. But I think, and I've heard, Biden's been a politician for a very long time. He's been through the Cold War. He doesn't like Russia. And I think we're going to see some more tension, or at least more to be said between US and Russia and their involvement within the United States in the last few years. And I wonder to see how that plays out when it comes to international trade.
Yeah,
I think
interesting point.
I think in general, though, U.S. relations should improve under the Biden administration. when it comes to trade. And I think there's a lot of optimism from foreign countries that, their relationships will improve. I think China's in a great position. I think they're saying, you know what, this is perfect for us because they weren't getting anywhere with Donald Trump.
Yeah.
And so I think, as you said, Joe, I think a lot of people, international equities, Europe, I think there's a lot of opportunity. I think people are realizing a lot of the US stocks are starting to become, highly valued, and that there's still, countries in Europe that have struggled through the coronavirus and they didn't see as much of a recovery as maybe some of the US companies. Maybe they didn't see as much stimulus. And so I think there's lots of opportunity. And as we get closer and closer to hopefully a vaccine in 2021, hopefully, some sort of eradication of this virus, and the opportunities that lie there with really cheap companies, with good growth opportunities, you're going to see a lot of managers move that way.
Yeah, and to sort of circle both to Europe and here in Canada, I don't know if Biden is going to completely be lax on China. I think he is going to put some pressure, just not as much as maybe Trump did. But the thing is if the U.S. relaxes even just a little bit on China, it kind of gives other countries the ability to relax as well. And so what is that going to mean? How much are they going to relax? And is that going to stimulate some trade in some countries such as Europe, who trades a lot with China, and here in Canada as well?
I think one of the things that we should touch on, though, is what's the impact, as you mentioned a little bit of Canada, what's the impact on us up here in Canada with a new president, right? We've got Joe Biden coming in. We've seen already, and Joe, you kind of mentioned, he's wanting to move towards more environmental. We've got, pipeline projects in Canada that have been kind of stymied as well. There's the oil has been hit hard out west. So what do we see as kind of the implications to us in Canada? I know Trudeau said he'd be watching the election. So what are we going to see when it comes to our relations and how it may affect us and our economy as well?
Well, I think from a general relation point of view, I think it's going to strengthen the Canada-U.S. relationships, having Joe Biden as president now. When it comes to oil, knowing what the platform is for Biden, it may not help us. So we may have a good relationship, but it may not help us as far as a country. And I think I'm hoping that our government is starting to see that and how we need to shift. We need to shift, and not be so resource-based in the oil and look to other opportunities for Canada to continue to grow.
I mean, you got to remember that Joe Biden was vice president when Obama was in power, and Obama and Trudeau got along famously. So is that going to translate between the two of them going forward? We'll have to see. But I do think the question for me is this going to be the tipping point for the U.S. when it comes to SRI and SRI companies, where where we see more and more money going into those companies? I mean, we've seen it increase in a more organic way, but are we going to see governments start to put their dollars in it too, which would really be a bit of a tipping point? Because Europe and a lot of other places around the world, they're much farther advanced in this sector than the US is. And I think it's just a matter of time before we see it, and that would definitely drive those kinds of funds and those kinds of investments.
And I think we are going to head into that direction. And I think it's going to be that demographics, the millennial group and younger, that are going to push us that way, and they're going to dictate, and we've got to move. So the signs are there. The signs are there, I think. Sure. And I think a lot of companies are looking at it. Like even the fossil fuel companies, they're looking at to say, how can we move towards more environmentally friendly? And I think we can't ignore it any further. And I think the next 3-4 years, we should see some definitely improvements in those areas.
Yeah, and the government's usually slow, but will Biden be the one that gets them on board? That's what I'm interested in seeing.
And it's just it's a balancing act too. Keep in mind, right? We don't want to move totally into environmentally friendly at the expense of killing our economy.
Yes.
So we got to move slowly, and that's the key, I think, is to move slowly and
Mm-hmm.
transition into that, but have a definite plan.
Yeah.
It's finding that magic secret recipe, right? On transitioning out of one and into the other. And actually, Courtney and I touch a lot on that in our upcoming socially responsible investment video on the transition from fossil fuels to green energy.
Mm-hmm.
So it's definitely a really hot topic, and I think that's good, as you said, Joe. I think that's good. It's the way we need to go, and I think especially the younger generation is realizing that their future living on this planet depends a lot on how the economy transitions over the coming decades, right? The coming 10, 20 years, I think is big for the climate, for the environment. So there's going to be lots to see there. So I think we've touched on a lot of topics, but is there anything left that your opinions, your thoughts on where we are now today? Joe Biden leading in the Final Four. I'm calling it the Final Four for the Final Four states that remain undecided.
Yes.
Very close to victory as we head into what is, we're a week into November now, approaching the final 7 weeks of 2020 into 2021. How do we see the rest of this year playing out?
Yeah, like from a market point of view, quite honestly, I think either way, I think the markets are going to show some very positive signs for the year.
Yeah.
We're going to have some volatile, we're going to have some uncertainty, especially after the election and with the potential of lawsuits. But those lawsuits will take years and years into the courts, right? So
If they go
eventually,
anywhere.
yeah, and the markets will eventually ignore those. But I think from an investment point of view, I think we're going to end up with a positive year. And quite honestly, I think 2021 will be a positive year. So if you're out there, stay invested.
Mm-hmm.
Yep. I think the big thing now that we're kind of, and I mean, right now there's still big focus on the U.S. election, but as we transition out of this, all the dust settles, everyone, everything's calmed down. The real focus is going to become on the vaccine for the coronavirus as we enter next year. So I think the news will quickly switch from the election, lawsuits, everything like that, to a new stimulus package and into the coronavirus. So it'll be interesting to watch over the coming weeks, months, and into the new year. But I think that's a good summary so far of where we are today. As said, there is no conclusion yet to this because we still don't know for sure. But we'll be back in a couple weeks, and for sure by then we can give a bit of a wrap-up summary, closing remarks, I'll say, on the U.S. election once it is completely decided. But thank you so much for tuning in to this week's episode. A reminder, the Socially Responsible Investment video series has 3 episodes remaining. There'll be a video out next week, or this week, I guess, when you're hearing this podcast on Thursday. So stay tuned for that, and we will see you in the next episode.